Good afternoon for everyone. My name is Jesus Rojas. I'm here with my partner,
Emily Palma.
and today we will have episode 12, the case to parenting today. I have with my perfect guests. Thank you for being here. You can check your names.
Yeah, my name is Clarence Jones. I'm the executive director of the Human Partnership, and I'm really excited about being here. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paige Hill. I am a third year medical student, also working with the Human Partnership.
And I'm Glen Palm, and I'm a retired faculty member from St. Cloud State. And I also am working with the Children's Museum in St. Cloud that just opened up in the last week. So I'm also excited to be able to talk with both of you today.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here in this afternoon. Uh, summer is starting. Thank you. That's incredible. So it's better episode in summer and in winter. Winter is so cold. So okay, thank you. For starting, I have my first question for three of us. What does it mean to be a great parent today? Has that definition changed over time? Want to start?
Sure, I can start. Being a great parent today, I think part of being a great parent today is really listening, being able to listen to your children and to watch them and observe them. I think the other part of being a great parent today is really knowing what you want to pass on to your children. In working with parents over the years, one of the things that I think is really important is knowing what you think is important and what you want to pass on to your kids. Because if you don't know that, then you're passing on sort of confusion to them. So those are a couple things that I think are important to be a great parent these days. At least those are a good foundation.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add the idea of just showing up, trying. You might not have the same interests of your kids, right? Like things change, but the idea of just being present, doing the best you can, and learning and growing together.
I like that idea about listening, being engaged with your kids. And I know that it's sometimes very, very difficult, but I think that part of it is that not to be threatened, because they're living in a different world than what we were brought up in. And so it's very, very, very important for you to have some kind of understanding about how to work with them and how to help them to become more effective and better people.
You can move with this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is another question for all three of you. What are the biggest challenges facing parents right now, especially in underversed or culturally diverse communities?
I think for me, some of the biggest challenges right now is parents really don't understand how the world is changing, and many parents are like myself. I'm very seasoned, so sometimes I live in my old world, and the world is changing around me, and so the biggest challenge is being willing to enter into a conversation with your children and understanding some of the issues and some of the factors that are impacting their life.
Oh, I love that. I'll add the idea of sometimes there's a information overload, right? Because when we have a question, what do? We pull up our phone, we look it up, and sometimes knowing like what is social media saying and it used as more of like entertainment versus what is something that is reliable and good like role model for us to base parenting off of.
I think that some of the challenges is technology and being in everybody's life and the way it is. I think the other challenge that I see is the uncertainty. What is the world going to be like? Being in education for a number of years, one of the things we are thinking about. So, what kind of, as you young people think about, what do you want to be when you grow up, or how many different things do you want to be? But what that uncertainty, and how do you prepare your children for that uncertainty? What are the skills that they need? What are the values that they need? What do you want to give them to be able to also be part of that uncertainty?
By the way, for starting, I want to know what's your best history with your parents?
Our history with our parents,
Yeah.
with our own parents, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question.
That is a good question. And the world has changed so much since
Of
I was
course.
a
Yes.
kid. I've been watching films. My dad did films when I was growing up. So I've been watching myself in the last couple of days, looking at them, and when I was 7 and 8 and 9, and the world was different. I grew up in Chicago. I grew up in a working class neighborhood in the west side of Chicago. So in the 1950s, it was the world was simpler in some ways. I think there was some sense of optimism that is sometimes hard to find these days. So, and my parents were pretty traditional, although my mom worked. She worked at a pizza joint, which was wonderful for us because I didn't know that for a long time, and I found out at some point when I was about 8 or 9, and it was like, we went to somebody else's house and tasted this stuff, and I went, this is good. What is this? This is pizza. And she worked in a pizza place. So after that, we went, there were 3 boys in our family. We went to her restaurant on Friday night and had pizza and french fries
That's lucky.
and spaghetti because we were Catholic and we couldn't have meat.
Oh.
So that's what we had growing up. Good stuff.
Thank you.
Oh, I love that. We love spaghetti. I guess when I think of growing up, my grandma lives in northern Minnesota, and we spent pretty much every weekend, like Fridays after school, pack up and go up there. And a lot of that was doing yard work. And it's funny to say now because in the moment it didn't feel very fun. But my grandma lived independently in the woods, like with burning her own wood. And so we would spend most of the summer pretty much preparing her for winter. And it's crazy to think that like all that work and like all the different things we did, how much you bond as a family and you get to know one another. And it is a lot of work, but then parents make it fun too. So, yeah.
So my story is a little bit different, and I want to be very respectful and kind in how I say this. I am a child that was adopted by my auntie and my uncle because the family situation that I was in I was kind of passed around a little bit. I'm trying to keep that really nice. And like many families that we're dealing with now and parents, people did the very best that they could, right? And so I found myself going home with my auntie and my uncle on their wedding night. I was my gift to my auntie and my uncle. Okay, and I say this very respectfully that my parent did the very best that they could, and sending me home with my auntie and my uncle was one of the best decisions that they could have made. And so growing up, I knew who my family was. I had experiences with them and things like that. And I think I'm sharing this with you because I want you to know that every family doesn't have those two parents. And even though you might be with one or the other, it still can turn out well if people love you and support you in this process. So that's my history.
Thank you. Follow with the question A, please.
I do want to say something about you and separate parents, of course. I come from a home of like two different parents. I've ever since I was very little, and it's very hard at a young age because you don't mentally know what's happening. And in my biggest assumption when I was little, I assumed it was my fault. Now at the age I am, they tell me it wasn't. It was different complicating things that they just couldn't get along.
Yeah. And I think it's good. I think it's good when we can talk about it like this, because as you just said, because very honestly, I'm glad you said that because I had attachment issues.
Right.
So I know that. I know that even in my as I grew up, I think I was 40 before I really began to deal with that. But the things that parents do or don't do for their children can affect their children all the way up until they're much older.
Yeah.
So I think this conversation is very good to have.
Okay. Another group question. How can parents build trust and open communication with their children, especially as they grow into teens?
So I think part of it really is we talked about this before is listening. your kids want the best. You want the best for your kids, okay? And part of this trust is giving them the opportunity to be kids and at the same time to be able to grow. And I think that part of what happens sometimes is because you're the parent, you know, the kids have to do things a certain kind of way. And that really doesn't necessarily build trust. I mean, it can build resentment, you know, because your kids are saying, I see the world this way, you see the world that way. Can we at least talk about it? But if you say, like, no, you have to do it my way. And again, I do believe that parents have the responsibility of, of, of raising their children up in a correct manner. So I'm not saying, like, let your kids run crazy or run wild. But I am saying that you, at times, in order to build trust, you have to also trust them that the decision, that the things that you have done in their lives will help them to make better decisions.
Yeah, and I think like using that like idea of trust can be built really early on through the idea of like role modeling, like doing healthy behaviors. Like we talk a lot about like nutrition, like modeling like healthy things like that will kind of build a framework for kiddos to kind of learn off of at a young age, and then also work on that trust of like I see my parents doing it, so that means I can do that too, and kind of just enabling that relationship.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think that parents also can learn to. I think parents need to, as Clarence said, set limits for their kids and be clear about their expectations. They're socializing their kids into the culture, so that they have to do that. That's their responsibility. I think the other thing that happens with parents is that, and we see, I see this with fathers and studying fathers, that we want to see fathers grow as adults. And so they grow along with their kids in some ways. And so I think being open to learning from and with your kids, especially as they grow into teen years, is one way to keep the communication open.
Thank you. Okay, we keep with other group question. So, what role does mental health play in parenting today, and how can families prioritize it together?
Boy, mental health is just an issue, it's an issue for parents, and it's an issue for kids in ways that we weren't as aware, I don't think, of as we are now. My wife does infant mental health, and so I'm really sensitized that mental health issues that people didn't think were even there, a number of years ago. So sometimes I wonder if it's because we're more aware of it. Sometimes I wonder if it's just the stress of society, the changes in society, what's going on, whether that's causing people to really struggle with mental health issues. And it's become more open. It's okay to talk about mental health, which is, I think, really a healthy change that we've seen. And people are, encouraged to get help.
Oh, you want me to do it? Okay. All right. So, when I think about mental health, I think so many times we think about mental health as somebody really acting out with some really outlandish behaviors. But I don't think people realize that mental health could also be depression. It creates a lot of stressors and things like that. And we live in a world where there is so much uncertainty that it's almost impossible not to have some impact of mental health help, affecting you. And in fact, at one time I was reading this. I don't know whether I heard it or saw it, but they said 50% of us have mental health issues anyway. So that's like, okay. Anyway, so it is a factor. It is something that we need to be aware of. It also is something that we need to make our children aware of as parents, that we have additional stressors and we want to make sure that you have a way in order to address them. So, having ways of learning how to address your stress is going to be very, very important.
Yeah. I'll add on to the idea of like ways of like addressing the stressors, because a lot of times like we can't get rid of all of our stressors, right? Like a lot of times we still have to work, we still have to do things that aren't necessarily going to go away and they're kind of a part of living. So the idea of like having someone to talk to, like if that is a medical professional, like a trained therapist, or if it's the community around you, like if you can rely on family, friends, and kind of develop that relationship. Like we all know how to love and care for one another, but sometimes we just don't always let each other.
You can keep with the next question, please.
Paige, you work at the intersection of medicine, I am sorry about my English, pediatrics, and community wellness that are some wait communi- community wellness that are some key things parents should understand about trauma and how it shows in kids.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. So, trauma really shows up in our bodies, and I am not an expert in trauma therapy, but I know that the trauma our grandparents have, our parents have, does pass through. And it doesn't mean that all hope is lost, and sometimes it gets kind of scary when we think about that, but it's the whole idea that kind of going back to the idea of role modeling, like showing healthy habits and behaviors. Like if you can see your patient, like your parent reach out for help, maybe that will enable you one day as like an older adult or in time of crisis to kind of build those skills and then be able to know that you can do that when you need help.
Okay, thank you. My question right now is for Glen Palm. So, your book, the Daddy book, explores the role of fathers. What inspired you to write it? And how has fatherhood changed in recent decades? And why is important to talk specifically about father involvement and parenting conversations?
Boy, that's a lot of questions. What inspired me? Well, we may have to go back and get recap of some of those. But what inspired me, I think, to do this was in my career, I've discovered that the earlier you work with children, the greater chance you have of making an impact. So the Daddy book is really focused on babies and fathers, and both of them growing together. And I think working with fathers over the years, it was like this is the important time to really work with dads. This is the time when baby comes, and oftentimes dads were, they weren't supposed to take care of babies. You didn't know, mom's going to breastfeed, she's going to take care of them, she's going to change the diapers. You just go and make some money or do whatever, and come back and maybe help me. But now we expect fathers to be involved, and so starting out right away and thinking that the foundation of the Daddy book is really building a strong relationship between dads and their babies. And so in the Daddy book, we've tried to do that in a number of different ways by games that dads play. And they're all kind of based on research that we know about fathers and how they form relationships with their kids, which is different than mothers. Mothers, I talk about it as pathways. Fathers have these pathways that are different. Mothers carry the baby around, and so they really have a different experience of getting connected to this baby. And fathers they have to find some different ways. Play is one of them. Singing, taking care of babies, learning to do some of that work is also important. Touch, reading, talking, all of those kinds of things are important. And we tried to put those in the Daddy book to really encourage dads early on to build this relationship and say, you have an important role. Your baby needs you, instead of saying, well, I'll wait until the baby can catch. I know you can play catch in the backyard, we do those kinds of things. And so getting them involved right away, I think was part of what felt important from my perspective of doing the Daddy book. And you asked some other questions, but if you want to go back.
I asked more for how has fatherhood changed in recent decades?
How has fatherhood changed? I think that the big change that I've seen, and I've worked with dads from the 1970s, late 70s till now. So I've been able to see a couple generations of dads. And I think the change is that everybody expects dads to do more. They expect dads to be more involved. And And so I think that the expectations are there. We have some more support for dads to do that. I see, and moms are they're the big gatekeeper in many ways. They're the ones who can make it easier or harder for dads to be involved. So I think that change has pushed dads to think that they should be more involved, and for moms to want dads to be more involved because they're oftentimes working and trying to do other things. They need the help to do that. So I think that's probably the biggest change that I've seen. The thing that's stayed the same is that dads still want to be close to their kids. They really want to have a close relationship. And I thought that would change, and I wouldn't see dads coming in each generation continuing to say, I'd still like to feel closer to my kids than I do. So that's interesting. I'm puzzled by
No, it is.
why that hasn't changed more since dads are spending more time with their kids.
Thank you. My next question is going to Karen Jones. So, how does your work at Human Partnership support healing and healthy parenting?
I think I kind of mentioned my own personal life story, but it's also in meeting people like Glenn. So we've known each other I always say we've known each other for 2 centuries, the 20th and the 21st century. So I've known him for a while, and I've also known other people who have been involved in fatherhood. And one of the things for me is that because of my life experiences, because of the things that I've learned, I realize how important it is. In order to have a healthy family, you also have to have healthy information. And part of what we try to do is we try to find authentic relationships, authentic information, evidence-based information, and we try to make sure that it's readable, acceptable, and understandable by fathers. And so part of my work really is to be in that space, in that place where we find these treasures like Glenn and Paige who can help us to help families become stronger, because that's what I want. I mean, ultimately, if you ask me why do I do the work that I do, is I want healthy families. I understand what it's like to be unhealthy. Not that I would ever say something like my life was horrible, because I would never say that, because I was blessed. But I do realize that there are things that we can do to minimize the stressors and the anger and the frustration and the loneliness that children are facing if people only knew. And so part of what we try to do is to give people information that they can utilize and that they can do. And I think part of what Glenn was talking about a little bit earlier about the daddy book is that, I would always talk about, when families have babies, sometimes men want to go out and they want to buy Nike shoes. I'm saying, no, buy Payless. That baby's going to grow out of those shoes in about 2 months. You done spent $60 to $80 on a pair of shoes that the kid won't even be able to use. You know what I'm saying? So we have to have information. We have to make people and fathers and families understand there are some things that are really important. There's some things that are important, but you have to understand the difference between the two. And you also want to make sure that what you're doing is going to be for the betterment of the child. One last thing that really kind of why I do what I do. I've seen parents go out and spend $1,000 on their baby's first birthday. I don't understand that. The baby don't understand that. Give the baby a cupcake with a candle in it. That baby will be happy as he can be, or she could be, But I think sometimes parents are trying to prove something, and so what we're trying to say to them is that there are things that we can do that really doesn't cost you a lot of money, but that will truly, truly enhance the life of that child.
It is. By the way, I have other question for you. How many years you have working with Human Partnership? How do you think this partnership can help the community, parents, kids? Thank you.
So Human, in this particular shape, has been around since 2011 as Human. But prior to that, we had about 30 years of working in the community around fatherhood and around those kinds of practices. So yeah, about 30 years.
You can give me this question, please.
What does respectful parenting look like from a youth perspective that you would assume come from?
Well, I think I should ask you that question. um, I think respectful parenting, probably from a youth, is a parent who will listen and will try and understand what's going on and be open to it. You know, what I learned, I think, from parenting teenagers was that I had to be available when they were ready to talk. I couldn't go, tell me what's, that I had to sort of be there and be present and feel like they could talk to me. And they often pick the most inopportune times. They don't pick you're really tired, you've had a hard day, and they come in and it's like, okay, I need to just take a breath and
Need a
listen.
moment.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's one way of just being there, and kids will sense that you're there, and you will listen, and you won't if they've done something, you won't jump down their throat about it. You'll be there to listen and try and understand and figure out, okay, so what can we do together?
Thank you.
I'll just echo what was previously said about like the idea of like setting limits. Like there are like limits, but also being there, being available, even in the hard moments. Just wanted to bring those up.
So respectful parenting to me, as you were talking, Glenn, I remember this, is that it is that whole idea about listening. And sometimes your kids won't tell you directly. So what I used to do with my kids is I would put them in a car, and I would drive to Baldwin, Wisconsin, to A&W root beer stand. I'd put them in the back of the car, and I would just listen. And I kept my hands on the wheel because they'd be saying some stuff like, "Oh my goodness," but at least it gave me the opportunity to hear honestly and clearly what they were experiencing, so that I could find a way in which to engage them. So that's what we did.
Thank you. I go with next group question. How does culture shape parenting styles and expectations?
I mean, it really like shapes like the family dynamic. If you think about it, like who's there at the birth, right? Like before a baby enters this world, there's so many like different norms that come into it. So I think being open to you, your partner's family, and what's really matters to them, because it's kind of like a family morals, truly.
Yeah, I think it's, oftentimes when you have a mother and a father coming together, they may come from different kinds of families, beliefs, and one of the things that we often say in doing parent education is that you're now the parents, and you get to choose what the rituals and traditions are. You may want to use some of the same, and your mother or your mother-in-law may want to, you should do this or you should do that. But as parents, you also need to think about, how do I do this? How do I take responsibility? And what do I take from both, from my family? What do I want to continue? And what do I want to perhaps change? And that's sort of the responsibility and the right of parents to do that. So that's.
I like that, Glenn. I like that whole idea about, when the mother-in-law says, "You got to do it this way," you say, "Maybe not." I always talk about in parenting, you have the in-laws and the outlaws, right? In families. So I think having, as you just said, which I really appreciate, is you as the family, you shape the traditions. You talk about what's going to be important for you. You take a look at the culture around you, and you say, like, there's some things about this culture that are not helpful for us. These are some things that are not in my tradition. These are some things that are not of my value. And you help your children to understand why you've chosen to do that. I think that for many families, I mean, we have a lot of families here that are not necessarily been Americanized as much as such. who are struggling with that whole idea. But the reality is that lovingly you can tell your children something about their culture. You can create new traditions,
Yeah.
but do it in respectfulness to the child, and not dominating or domineering over the child.
Uh, Thank you for your answer. Can you please read the letter G? Please, letter J. I got you. Okay, what are common myths or stereotypes about fathers you want to challenge with this work? Thank you.
Well, I can think of one. The fact that fathers don't go to their child's child visits. Um, Within medical school, I've seen a lot of really active parents, and sometimes it's just a dad taking their baby and asking like super appropriate questions and kind of being there and being the protector for the family. Sometimes it's both parents. So that's something I want to challenge, that it's a safe space to go ask your healthcare professional questions in a non-judgmental way.
Well, it's interesting the question. I think we have in our culture now, we have a variety of different family styles. Okay, some of the things that we're accustomed to, or and some of the things that we're not accustomed to, and so I think that it's very, very important uh, for us to take a look at our parenting style and determine how we're going to work together. And so it's very, very important for me. Um, and Glenn, I think you mentioned it before, that we talk a lot about co-parenting, and co-parenting looks so different. I mean, because sometimes um, the parent is in a loving relationship, sometimes in a not so loving relationship. Sometimes but I always say this: whether you take care of your babies, whether you like the mother or not. From my perspective, you take care of your babies, because your babies were not responsible for coming here. You know what I mean? And so you have a responsibility to do that. So there's a lot of things that are going on with this particular thing, and so co-parenting is one of those things.
Yeah, the co-parenting, and even though their structure may be very different, some of the underlying dynamics of communication going on and being able to listen to each other, being able to be respectful to each other, whether you like the mom or not. I worked in prison with dads for 30 years, and so we would talk a lot about, and the biggest issue was relationships with mom. And I didn't want to talk about that right away because they would just go off on negative stuff.
Right.
I needed to spend some time talking about, let's talk about your kid and why they're important before we can get to mom. And then we get to mom and you say, I can say, but what do you want for your kid? And they can change. And what I used to tell the men was, you have to be role models, and you can't change her, but you can do your best to listen, to try and do good communication, and to be respectful. It might not always work, but that's what you can do, and you can show that to your kids. So it's one of the things I think about co-parenting is that the kind of strategies or communication skills that we want people to, those go across all families. Doesn't matter what the family structure is.
I have a question for us. So, I listen us right now, and I'm thinking, what do you think parents can change his way for, uh, how do you say crianza in English? Crianza. Crianza? Yeah. Yeah. What do you think the parents can change for raising your child in 2025? I mean, years passing, cultures change, kids change his
Yeah.
way for do everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you think parents can be in that year? I mean,
And right now, what can we think about parents changing to really
totally, because I think
adapt?
their parents, like my parents, have different crayons like me.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's different years.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you think parents can be actualizing today? Thank you.
Today, I think, one of the things that the parents can do is continue to be role models for their kids in terms of being good people, just being good, decent people who are kind, thoughtful. I think that's one of the most important things that the parents can do. And I think the other thing that parents could probably do better is spend less time on their phones. I watch little babies, and parents are not paying attention, and the baby's trying to get their attention, and then you watch when the kids get to be toddlers, they want that thing that's taking their parents, and the parents sometimes give it to them, but that also, I taught classes for dads on Saturday mornings, starting in the mid-'80s. And one of the things that Dad said was, I get to come here and I get to be with my kid and it's quality time. I don't have to do anything else. I just have to be here with my kid. And then at some point, I saw the first dad come in with his cell phone in a holster and I thought, ooh, so what's going to happen now? And, now when I see that same class, which I don't teach anymore, everybody's got it in their pocket. And everybody's distracted by it. So I think one of the things that parents can do is figure out how to, it's so disrespectful in some ways, the way that we tend to use our phones in terms of communicating with others. And I'm at fault. If you ask my wife, she would say, you're not listening because I have my phone out and I'm trying to do two things at once. And we can't. We can't really listen to people. So that's one of the things that strikes me as really relevant to what's going on today.
Thank you.
Did you have anything to add, or?
Well, I appreciate it. I think that in this culture, it's always about I. It's always about I, and so sometimes parents can get caught up into that I, that it's all about me and not about my child. I don't think that people mean that to be disruptive or to be destructive, but it is. It can be. And I think that part of what in 2025, I think, as Glenn is saying, listen, give your baby a chance. And when they say something that you don't like, don't take it necessarily that they're trying to be disrespectful to you. Because I think that's the other part too, is that as you start to grow older, you have an opinion, and your opinion doesn't just because but you have to learn how to express your opinion. You can't challenge your dad. I mean, or your parents, because they that's a challenge. Okay, but you can learn how to ask the questions, and they can learn how to receive the question in a way so that you can navigate through 2025, because you need to do that. You need to be able to learn the skills that are necessary for growing up and being a responsible, healthy person.
I'll just add, in our day of technology, like, we get shown a lot of apps, right? And some of the apps, I guess, could be helpful in terms of like health or like development, like using those. But I mean, still being able to go play outside with your kids, finding like safe spaces where you can just be one-on-one and have that good quality time.
Okay, thank you. You can keep with the letter N, please.
Okay. Group question. How can families honor their culture heritage while also adapting to the norm of American society?
It's a
Is
very
that-
hard question, very long question.
You're just going to give it to me.
Uh,
I think that it's a hard one. We were just talking about before a little bit about that you're creating sometimes a new culture for your kids, and I watch immigrant parents in St. Cloud. We were able to do some work with immigrant families of young children, and it was interesting to just listen to the change that was going on. So the Somali dads would talk about, we don't have a place anymore. We used to be the head camel, and now we're nobody's following us the way that we had expected. And the mom's saying to me, you work with fathers. Can you get the men to do more? And I was listening to both of those things. And then I talk to young Somali men and say, I don't want to have kids right away because that's too hard. So, people coming into into this country have to figure out where to go. And such a hard balance of what to pass on. People want to pass on their culture, their language, and those are so important to your identity. And kids sometimes also want to learn the language that's of the culture that they're in. So I think that people are going through a transition, second generation, the third generation, and sometimes when you're doing that as a young person in your own identity, you're not really all that interested in the roots. So last year I went to Finland. That's where my grandparents came from on my father's side, and I was curious about it. But it took me until I was 40 to be curious about it. I wasn't curious about it when I was 19. I didn't say I didn't care about that. I was trying to do my own identity in this time and in this space. So I think that's a really interesting question, but a difficult one to think about. How is that working?
Thanks. I was just thinking, Glenn, maybe about 15, 20 years ago, we did a fathering acculturation program at Concordia University. We brought in about 60 to 70 people that came in because we were concerned about how fathers, immigrant fathers coming into this country, how they were being minimized. I want to say it like that. I talk a lot about that. Not that it's always the way I say it sometimes might come across really harsh, but I think that when people come to this country sometimes, and there's such a clash of cultures, that we do have challenges that could easily or more easily be addressed if we would just talk about them more openly. And so part of what we have done with Human has always tried to be in that space where we would try to work with folk and work with parents in a way in which we could appreciate them, but at the same time help them to understand what the various dynamics are for the family. You know what I mean? So it's really hard. This whole thing around parenting, acculturation, trying to make it work and developing traditions and things like that. This is hard work. In fact, being a father is probably the hardest job in the world. At least that's what I say. Okay. Okay.
I also want to acknowledge the fact that, like, with the state of the world right now, like, it's not always safe to, like, show culture in, like, public spaces. And, like, the whole idea that, like, yes, having strong, like, ancestral ties and roots is important, but it is complicated right now, right? So kind of figuring out that balance, I think, is an issue that we're going to continue to face and talk more about.
Thank you. I will keep with next group question. So, what does healthy co-parenting look like when mothers and fathers are not in a romantic relationship? Thank you.
When they're not in a good relationship, is that or
Go ahead.
oh wow, okay. So I recognize that in many times the families that we're in, they're not necessarily in a good relationship. And so, as Glenn was talking about, we don't spend our time trying to talk about how bad the other person is. Okay, what we're trying to say to them is that, and I said this a little bit earlier, is that you take care, you love your baby, whether you like the mother or not. And that's hard, but it's got to be true. That's your child. You have to do what you have to do, but you also have to teach people communications. How do you communicate with people, and especially how do you communicate with each other when it comes to your child? And the thing that people really don't understand is that you just communicate any kind of way, those things impact your child. You know, you hollering at the mother, or you hollering at the father, or you taking some extreme, making some extreme threats and stuff like that. Those things impact your child, and that's not really what you're trying to do. So that would be my thought.
Go ahead. You have anything to add?
No.
No. You know, I think the other thing is helping men to think about. We talk about emotional intelligence and being aware of their own emotions and being able to manage their own emotions, because that becomes an important part of communication. If you're not, you know, if you're not in a place where you can say something good, then shut up. Don't get yourself in bigger trouble. So knowing how to manage strong feelings, and those are really strong feelings that go back and
Yeah.
forth. So I think that would be the other piece I would add.
You wanna read the next question?
I do want to say something back to
Yeah.
question N. Both my parents come from Mexico, and recently, I think 2 or last year, I can't remember, I went to actually see my grandmother who lives there. And it was such an opening experience for me because I've never gotten so close to my own culture. And being there in that moment with my grandma, and actually just being in the place where my mom comes from and my dad, like the rest of my whole family, it was such a beautiful experience because I got to meet my uncles and aunts, even my younger cousins, and it was amazing for me that I actually got to experience that. And I want to go back just to have that feeling again, because it's an opening moment and you don't get that often.
Yeah, and you were connected to all of that you didn't realize before.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it was exciting, and it was also my grandpa's birthday.
Uh-huh.
So that's what made it so happy for me.
Yeah.
Okay, but let me continue with the questions. How can mothers and fathers support each other as partners in parenting, even when they have different approaches or challenges?
Yeah, I think that you know, and parents do, you know, they come from two different families, and those families may have different ways, different approaches to how you should parent. And it's important for parents to come to some common way of understanding. But children are also pretty adaptable to parents being different. You learn that early on because kids know which parent to go ask for something. If they want something. So kids are pretty smart about adapting to different parent styles. So parents don't have to be the same person, but there are some important things that you want parents to agree upon in terms of some limits that they have, so that one parent isn't telling the kid, oh yeah, you can do this, and the other parent is going, what? You told them what? So you know, I think that and it's going to happen that there's going to be some different styles.
I love this idea of like co-parenting, and then also navigating like the whole family support system, right? Like who's all included in this, and like how do we manage communication like with the mothers-in-laws, like with everyone, and like using that same communication style to kind of like embody co-parenting in the non-nuclear household that is the commonplace.
I think it's important for us to realize that every one of us are different. We all are individuals, and we all have our own idiosyncrasies and hang-ups and things like that. And so the fact is that you think that you know, it's always going to be peaches and cream, or it's going to always be nice honey, and it's not going to be like that, you know. And so understanding that we all have different techniques, but also understanding that we have to be respectful to each other. That's the whole thing, is that you have to respect people. Sometimes it's important, sometimes you don't like people, but you have to respect them. You know what I mean? You know, and in a relationship, sometimes, like, I don't like you today, but because you're my wife, my mother, my children, okay. So I'm not gonna say anything.
Yeah.
I'm gonna shut up.
Yeah, there's
That's it.
yeah,
That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna just shut up, you know. And then I'm gonna take a walk, and I'll see you in about 30 minutes. You know what I mean? So that's what I think.
Yeah, that's exactly what we need to do. It's the only way we can.
Yep. Yep.
Finally, they are our parents or children, so it's perfect. Yeah, yeah. I will give with next question. Is in moment of conflict or stress, what are some technicals parents can use to model emotional regulation for kids?
The
What you
emotion.
just said.
Yeah, yeah. This is what I just said. Yeah, you just like shut up. You're gonna regulate this. Okay, I'm not going to because the other thing too that you have to recognize, in spite of all of your emotional intelligence, you still are the parent. You still have to set a good model for your child. And so many times we forget this that once what you say gets out there, you can't take it back.
True.
You can't take it back. If you call your child something out of their name, you might buy them some ice cream a day later, but that child still remembers that. And so I think that you have to understand and be sensitive and aware that the things that you say to your children don't forget. So yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking like about like the emotional regulation part of it, and like we could talk about breathing exercises and like things like that, but I think sometimes just like stepping away, like when the emotions get high, like walking out of the room, like being alone for a second, but um, there are like other strategies to use, but I just feel like that's the simplest.
I want to say something real
Yeah,
quick.
go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. I want to say something real quick. I think that what we have to recognize is that we're not less of a man by walking away. I'm just talking about for fathers right now. We're not less of a man for walking away. In fact, it takes a lot of maturity to be able to say, I'm not going to enter into this conversation because I realize the impact that it's going to have on my child. You know what I mean? And I know that sometimes when you have a lot of stressors on you already, it's hard for you to understand that. But and you won't always be successful, but you need to try to be as successful as you can, as much as you can, whenever you can.
And I think the other thing that I would say is that parents make mistakes all the time. They're not perfect. And one of the things that can happen when you do make a mistake is you have to figure out how to repair that, how to make up. And one of the things that's really important to teach your kids is how to, I made a mistake. I yelled at you today because I was really frustrated that something happened to me. It wasn't your fault. And you can say that to kids, and then they learn that, okay, you know, you make mistakes, and when you make mistakes, there are ways of repairing the mistakes to some extent. And so that's another lesson that you can have. And Clarence, I think those big things, you walk away and you take a walk for about 30 minutes.
Yeah. It's also, it's really not a loss of manhood.
No.
You know what I mean? And that's what people have to understand. I know that in many of our cultures, it is like that, but it really isn't that. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Uh, how can communities better support parents and caregivers? And what role can community space like barbershops, clinics, church playing in strengthening parent-child relationships?
So I think that with Human, we're involved in the church, we're involved in the community, we're involved in barbershops. I mean, we're talking about all these various things, and we're talking about the importance of having good communication. We're talking about being healthy, right? And being healthy does not just mean getting a shot. It's also psychological, it's also spiritual, it's also financial. And so one of the things and ways in which um, we do is we try to strengthen the community in those various places by providing them with accurate and appropriate and honest information, because that's really the key piece for actually making sure that our kids are safer, is that we give them the appropriate, accurate, and honest information. Now what they do with it, you can't, I always tell people, I'm not trying to run your life because I can hardly run my own life. But the reality is that as a practitioner, it's my responsibility to give you the most accurate information that I can.
This point brings up my favorite quote about health, is that actually 80% of it 80% of health comes from outside of the doctor's office. So only 20% of our health and our well-being comes within like a hospital or a clinic space. So really what we do in community spaces, in libraries, that's really what determines how healthy we're living our lives. So yeah.
The question that you're asking about how can community do that, I think we all try and do our little pieces. I've created a children's museum with lots of other people, and hopefully that will be a space that we can support parents. But we don't do a good job in our society supporting parents of young children. We do not provide. Every mother should be able to go and have her baby, and it shouldn't cost her anything. That should just be something that we should do in our society. We should provide some kind of care for kids when they're young if parents choose or need to work. And we don't do that for our kids. So I think, we try and do things around the edges, but to be honest with you, our society pales in comparison to many other societies around the world and the kind of support that they give to parents, especially parents of young children. So I need to just say the three of us sitting up here, we try and do our little bits, but boy, those people who are making laws at the state level and at the national level, they need some help to help really support parents.
Okay. Thank you. What do you think youth needs most from adults right now?
Boy, that's a question I could send back to you guys again. What do you think?
I think just listening, being there,
Uh-huh.
just actually being in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's all we mostly need.
Being present.
Just being
like we were
present in
talking
our
about
lives.
before.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think?
I think the balance right now can improve, like have the child opinion more in count. Like, eh, of course, we have different opinions or different ways to see the life or to see the things, problems, stress. But at final of the day, we need like children respect my parents' opinion. They need to respect our opinion, and we need to looking for a together opinion.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? A combination of both opinion.
Yeah.
I think that's all of communication. And
Yeah.
yeah,
We can learn from each other. I think that
totally.
that is such an important lesson in many ways. As a teacher, one of the things that I learned was I was my best self as a teacher if I could learn along with my students and from them.
It is.
Not just I know it all. I'll just tell you all of it. But I'm learning as well.
I want to say something real quick. I think it's a very, very interesting question, and I think that part of, the whole idea around respect is so important. But sometimes parents, because of their knowledge, might have a little bit of extra influence on whatever the decision is or whatever the question is. I mean, because I think sometimes we want to be respectful, but you have to be able to give that knowledge in a way in which the other person will hear it. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
It's not always 50-50. So you know what I mean. So that's one of the things that I would think about.
My final question for you guys today: what have you hope for the future?
What gives you hope for the future?
What gives us hope for the future?
What gives you hope for the future?
Can I say it real quick?
Yeah, of course.
You two. You two give us hope for the future because what you're saying and what you're doing right now is really letting us know that you want to do good things and we want to help you to do them.
Yeah, definitely you guys. It's so exciting and just
Aw.
learning and working together.
I would have to say the same thing, that watching young people and watching young people really do good things. And Paige, you're one of them. So you're sitting here between two old men.
Two seasoned old men.
Oh,
Lots of experience.
with lots of lots of
Yeah.
experience.
A lot of knowledge.
I was going to say, Clarence, in response to your, we feel like we have knowledge sometimes. And there's a saying, I think it came from Mark Twain, or that you know, when I was 18, my father didn't know anything, and by the time I was 24, he really learned a lot.
Okay, with that final question, we say bye for today. Thank you again for being here for
Thank you.
this time for talk with us about this really important theme. And for me, it was a perfect episode. Thank you again, and bye. See you next time.
Adios, bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Hey, thank you. You do excellent job.
Thank you, guys.